Don't let the scar girl touch my food. The man's voice sliced through the hum of the diner like a butcher's knife. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to open mouths. Behind the counter, Emily, 28 years old, back straight, eyes focused, stood perfectly still. The scar that flared down her left cheek seemed to glow beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. It was a permanent mark, carved into her by fire and fate, a silent scream from a night she could never forget. No one spoke. No one moved. No one defended her. Then, outside the window, a black SUV screeched to a halt. No. The door opened with sharp finality, and heavy boots met the pavement with purpose. The sound echoed through the tile floor as the door to the diner swung wide. Someone had just entered. And whoever it was, they brought silence with them. Laughter drained from the room. Even the coffee stopped bubbling behind the counter, as if the entire building had paused to witness what would happen next. The Silver Spoon Diner sat on the edge of Lakewood, a small town where anonymity was impossible. Everyone knew your name, your history, your scars. Winter had settled in deep, forcing customers inside where warmth mingled with the thick scent of bacon grease and endless pots of black coffee. Red vinyl booths were packed. Truck drivers wolfing down hot meals. High school students sharing fries and gossip. Single mothers counting change. Elderly couples cradling coffee like ritual. Emily Saunders had been here since 5 a.m., like she was every day. Her light brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, her uniform identical to her coworkers, but no one ever mistook her for anyone else. The jagged scar that ran from her left cheekbone to her chin made sure of that. She moved silently between tables, refilling coffee cups, clearing plates, taking orders, always gravitating toward the difficult customers, those seated in dark corners, the ones no one else wanted to deal with. Less attention that way, fewer eyes, fewer whispered insults. The regulars had grown used to her in their own way. Some gave her tight-lipped smiles, others averted their gaze. A group of teenagers once whispered loud enough for her to hear, "God, that's disgusting. Makes me lose my appetite." A mother had pulled her child close when Emily walked by, as though facial scars were contagious. Even old Mr. Foster, kind and consistent in his tips, never said a word when others made their cruelty public. Nobody ever did. Today was worse than usual. 2 young women had slid into booth 7, barely glanced at the menus, and when Emily approached with her notepad and quiet courtesy, they exchanged glances. One of them waved her over. "Excuse me," she said loudly, deliberately loud, so half the diner would hear. "Could we get a different waitress? Looking at that scar? I'm worried about hygiene." A middle-aged man sitting at the counter chuckled. "Yeah, that face is killing my appetite," he said, sipping his coffee. "Maybe she should be in the kitchen, somewhere nobody has to see her." Behind the register, Mrs. Martin, the diner owner, shifted uncomfortably. She needed her customers, but she also needed Emily. She said nothing. Her silence was a business decision. Emily's hands trembled as she set down a plate of eggs. Her name tag, Emily, in cheerful blue letters, suddenly felt like a joke. A coffee stain spread across her apron, like her shame leaking out into fabric. She nodded quietly, swallowing down the sting in her throat, and moved to the next table. "Maybe she should wear a mask," someone muttered. "Or work somewhere else entirely," another voice added. Emily kept her gaze locked to the floor, focused on table numbers, orders, silverware, anything but the people. Her silver chain, her only jewelry, caught the fluorescent light as she moved. At the end of that chain was a tiny locket, and inside it, a charred piece of fabric. A reminder of the night her life changed. And outside, the black SUV idled, its engine purring low like a warning. No one inside the diner had noticed. The windows were tinted dark. The driver hadn't moved. In the back seat, a man in an expensive suit adjusted his tie and checked his watch. His silver hair was flawless. His sharp eyes hadn't left the diner's entrance once. Emily wiped down table 12, the same one she'd served for the past 3 years. The same faces who'd watched her story unfold. The same townsfolk who chose not to remember. She didn't see the SUV. Didn't see the man stepping out, straightening his coat, walking toward the front door like something unfinished had finally come due. In 30 seconds, everything was about to change. But before she was the quiet girl in the diner, Emily Saunders had been something else entirely. She had been Lakewood High's brightest star. Valedictorian material. Scholarship letters from 5 universities stacked like trophies on the kitchen table. Her future was a runway. Long, bright, limitless. Then, until life decided to rewrite her script. Her mother died of cancer when Emily was just 16. Overnight, the college dreams withered. Her father, lost in grief, found comfort in the bottom of every bottle he could find. The house fell into shadows. The fridge emptied. The lights flickered. Emily dropped out 3 months before graduation. Someone had to keep the heat on. Someone had to cook dinner. That someone was her. She took double shifts at the local grocery store, came home to a father who barely remembered her name. Her hopes for college were boxed up with her mother's old clothes, donated, discarded, forgotten. For 3 years, she fought to survive. Grocery store by day, caregiver by night. Scraping coins into jars. Dreaming of a diploma that now seemed like a cruel joke. And then came the night that changed everything. December 15th, 2015. Emily was 19, living in a crumbling apartment on Maple Street, the kind where the heat never worked and the smoke detectors had long since died. She was asleep when the screaming started. "Fire, fire, someone help us!" Smoke punched her awake. Panic bled through the walls. The neighbors, the Hendersons, a young couple with twin 5-year-old boys, Danny and David. She could hear them crying, coughing. The hallway outside her door was already thick with smoke. Other tenants were fleeing, shoving each other out of the way. Emily, eyes stinging, turned toward the chaos and froze. "Mommy, we can't get out. The door's too hot," the boys cried. Their mother's voice, desperate and broken, screamed from the stairwell below. My babies are still up there." Emily didn't think. She just moved. The Hendersons' apartment door was locked. She kicked it 3 times, splintering it open. Smoke poured out like a beast. She found the boys huddled in the bedroom, cornered by fire. They were sobbing, trapped. "It's okay," she told them, wrapping them in wet towels from the bathroom. "We're getting out of here." The hallway was an inferno. There was no going back. But Emily knew the building. She knew the back bedroom window led to a fire escape. Carrying one boy at a time through blinding smoke and unbearable heat, she couldn't feel her hands, couldn't see her feet. Her cheek burned, her shoulder, her arm, but she kept moving. The window was stuck, sealed shut for years of paint and neglect. Emily grabbed a chair and smashed it. Flames burst into the bedroom. She shoved Danny through first, then David. They tumbled onto the iron fire escape just as she climbed out behind them, the room erupting behind her. The fire department arrived 4 minutes later, just in time to see Emily collapse, unconscious, the 2 boys screaming in her arms. She spent 11 months in the hospital. Skin grafts, physical therapy, counseling. The scar on her face was the most visible reminder, but her left arm and shoulder told their own stories. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a hero. She saw damage. Nasim. The Hendersons visited her daily. They brought flowers, tears, cards. "You saved our boys," Mrs. Henderson would whisper. "You're a hero." But Emily didn't feel like one. When she was finally discharged, the world didn't welcome her back. Job interviews ended before they began. "We're looking for someone more customer-facing," they'd say, smiling politely as they showed her the door. And now, standing in the diner, that door swung open again. The man from the SUV entered, scanning the room until his eyes locked onto Emily. Silence fell a second time. Booths turned to stone. His voice, when it came, was clear and loud. "Miss Emily Saunders?" She blinked, startled. "Yes?" He stepped forward. "I'm with the governor's office. You've been nominated for the Medal of Civilian Bravery." The diner gasped. Emily stood frozen, the diner's fluorescent lights glinting off her scar and her silver chain. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, for the first time in 9 years, someone stood for her. And suddenly, everyone remembered how to speak her name with respect. The silence in the diner was no longer laced with mockery, but heavy with shame. Eyes that had moments ago danced with cruel delight now dropped to the floor. Phones were lowered. Smirks vanished. Emily stood frozen, trembling as Senator Ellis held her hand, a hand others had refused to touch. She couldn't speak. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her scar seeming to pulse with the heat of long-buried memories suddenly dragged into the light. The two security men stood like statues at the entrance, ensuring nobody slipped away to avoid the moment of reckoning. Mrs. Martin's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. The same woman who'd asked Emily to work in the back now looked as if she wanted to crawl under the register and disappear. The businessman at the counter coughed nervously and muttered something to himself. The college students sat rigid in their booth, stunned into silence, their laughter replaced by the guilt of realization. Senator Ellis turned his full attention back to Emily. "I didn't know your name until 2 months ago," he said gently, his voice just for her now. "We were told it was an anonymous neighbor. The boys barely remembered. They were so young. But then I started digging. I found the hospital records, the fire report. I saw the photos, and I knew." He paused, his voice softening further. "You carried them down that fire escape. You were burned because you shielded their bodies with yours. Emily, you gave them life." Tears streamed down her cheeks now, silent and steady. For years she had endured the stares, the whispers, the disgust. For years she had told herself it didn't matter that no one knew. But now, the truth had come roaring back with a force she wasn't prepared for. Senator Ellis opened the envelope he'd pulled from his jacket and carefully handed her the contents. "This letter is from the president. It commends you for your bravery and selflessness. It should have come years ago. I'm sorry it didn't. I'm sorry we failed to find you sooner." He reached into his pocket again and produced a small black velvet box. Inside was a gleaming medal from the State Fire Department, its ribbon deep red and gold. He pinned it gently to the front of her apron over the coffee stains and name tag. Emily stared at it, lips trembling, unable to speak. "And this," the senator said as he raised his phone once more, "is from the boys." He tapped the screen. The video played again. "Hi, Emily," came the cheerful voices of Danny and David Henderson, now taller, confident teenagers, sitting side by side in a sunny backyard. "We never forgot you. You're our hero. Thank you for saving us. We hope we can meet you again someday." Gasps rose from several tables. Mrs. Martin let out a sob and pressed a napkin to her mouth. One of the college girls had tears on her cheeks. The woman who had demanded a discount earlier whispered something to her husband and hung her head in shame. Emily pressed the locket at her chest. The tiny piece of scorched fabric that had been her only proof that night was real. For years, it had been her silent reminder that she had once mattered. Now, the world finally knew. Senator Ellis turned back to the stunned diner crowd, still holding Emily's hand. "This woman deserves better than your cruelty," he said, his voice rising again. "She deserves your gratitude. She deserves your respect. And if she chooses to continue working here, I expect every person in this town to remember who she is." He gave Emily a gentle smile, then added, "Or if you want something more, Emily, an education, a new start, I have people who can make that happen. My foundation was built to support heroes like you." Her knees nearly gave out. For years, she had lived in the margins, surviving but never thriving. Now, a door was being held open again. A chance. A future. I don't know what to say," she managed to whisper. "Just say yes," he said with a smile. "Say yes to something better. You've earned it 100 times over." The diner was still eerily silent. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. Old Mr. Foster from his usual booth. His face was wet with tears, and for once, he wasn't silent. "She's always been brave," he said hoarsely. "Shame on all of us for forgetting that." Another clap joined his, then another. Soon, the entire diner, once filled with laughter at her expense, was on its feet, clapping for the woman they had dismissed. The sound grew into a standing ovation. Emily's hands shook as she clutched the medal and the letter. Her tears weren't of humiliation now, but of release. Of finally being seen, of being remembered not for a scar, but for the courage it represented. Senator Ellis leaned close. "Danny and David are at home today, but they'd love to meet you again. Would you like to come?" Emily looked around at the diner. The people who had shamed her, the booths that had hidden her, the kitchen she'd retreated to so many times, and nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that very much." He offered her his arm, and together they walked toward the door. The security men opened it wide, and Emily Saunders stepped into the light, no longer hiding. Behind her, the Silver Spoon Diner stood silent, forever changed by the truth they'd almost forgotten. She had saved lives. She had suffered in silence. But now, finally, the world was clapping for her, for the scarred girl who had been brave when it mattered most. The diner remained completely silent as Emily sobbed, overwhelmed by emotions she had buried for 9 long years. Her body trembled as if the weight of nearly a decade had just been lifted all at once. Senator Ellis looked around the room one final time. His gaze swept across every face, some stunned, some ashamed, none defiant. Then he spoke, his voice calm, but edged with warning. "Now," he said slowly, "does anyone else have something to say about Emily's appearance?" The transformation began instantly. Old Mr. Foster was the first to stand. With tears glistening in his eyes, he began to clap. Softly at first, hands slow and deliberate. One by one, others joined him. The sound of applause swelled until it filled the diner, a crashing wave that drowned out the lingering silence left by cruelty and ignorance. The college students who had recorded the scene on their phones now quietly deleted the videos. No one had to ask. The woman who had demanded a discount earlier left cash on her table and hurried out, her head bowed, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The businessman who had called Emily's face a health hazard sat motionless, staring at his untouched food, his face a deep, burning red. Mrs. Martin emerged from behind the counter, tears streaking down her cheeks as she approached Emily. "Emily, I am so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I should have stood up for you years ago. I should have protected you. You gave me a reason to hire you when no one else would." Emily, still shaken, replied softly, "That was enough." "No," Mrs. Martin said firmly now. "It wasn't enough, but things are going to change." And they did. Within a week, the Silver Spoon Diner was transformed. Mrs. Martin commissioned a local artist to paint a mural on the main wall. At its center stood Emily, dressed in her waitress uniform, upright and proud. Beneath her image, bold letters read, "Local Hero." Above her, sweeping across the mural, were the words, "Scars are stories of survival." The menu was updated too. A new item was added. The Hero's Blend, Emily's signature coffee. All proceeds from its sales were donated to a fund supporting burn victims and first responders. It quickly became the most popular item on the menu, not just for its flavor, but for the story it represented. Soon, Emily found herself invited to speak at Lakewood High School, the same school she'd been forced to leave so many years ago. Standing in the auditorium where she had once imagined a graduation that never came, she faced a crowd of 300 students. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," she told them, her voice steady. "It's doing what's right even when you're terrified, even when it costs you everything." A girl in the front row raised her hand. "Do you ever regret saving them?" she asked hesitantly. "Since it led to..." She gestured vaguely toward her own face, unsure how to say it. Emily smiled gently and touched the silver locket resting at her collar. "Never," she said. "Not for a single second. These scars remind me that I was brave when it mattered most. That's something I can carry with pride." The applause was thunderous. In the weeks that followed, letters began arriving at the diner from across the country. Burn survivors, accident victims, veterans with visible scars. Each letter was a story, a thank you, a connection. Inspired by Emily's courage, people shared their own journeys, finding strength in her example. Mrs. Martin created a bulletin board near the entrance and filled it with those messages. Postcards, photographs, handwritten notes, creating a living wall of hope and solidarity. The local newspaper ran a front-page story titled "Hometown Hero Hidden in Plain Sight." The article featured quotes from Danny and David, now 14, who spoke publicly for the first time about the woman who saved their lives. "We never forgot her," Danny said in the interview. "We just didn't know where she was." David added, "She's the reason we get to play baseball, the reason we go to school, the reason we have a future. She's the bravest person we know." Former customers began returning to the Silver Spoon, not just for coffee, but for redemption. Some brought flowers. Others left generous tips with handwritten notes. "Thank you for your service." A few couldn't face Emily directly, but sent cards through Mrs. Martin, expressing their apologies and admiration. The most meaningful visitor came on a quiet afternoon. A Vietnam veteran named Sam Rodriguez stepped through the diner doors. Burn scars lined his arms, the result of a long-ago battle. He had seen Emily's story on the news. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, gesturing to the stool beside where Emily was on her break. Of course not," she said warmly. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who didn't need to speak to understand each other. After a while, Sam spoke. "Been eating alone for 15 years, he said. "People stare, makes you want to hide." "I know exactly what you mean," Emily replied. Sam nodded. "Maybe we could eat together sometimes, two old soldiers sharing a meal." Emily smiled, really smiled, the kind she hadn't shared in years. "I'd like that very much." As the weeks passed, the Silver Spoon became more than just a diner. It became a haven. A place where those who understood pain, survival, and quiet strength could gather. People no longer saw Emily's scars as strange or uncomfortable. They saw them for what they truly were: badges of courage. Proof that strength leaves marks, and real beauty comes from surviving what was meant to break you. National media began to take notice. Talk show producers left voicemails. A publisher reached out with interest in a memoir. A documentary filmmaker asked for an interview, but Emily declined, her answer always the same: "I'm not ready for that yet." But she was ready for something else, something that would change everything. 3 months later, Emily stood before a crowd of 500 people at the Lakewood Community Center. The annual Honor the Hidden Heroes ceremony had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Burn survivors, veterans, first responders, and ordinary people who had shown extraordinary courage filled every seat. Senator Ellis introduced her, but this time, Emily didn't need anyone to speak for her. "My scars are not my shame," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "They are reminders that I was brave when it mattered most. Every mark on my face tells the story of two little boys who get to grow up because someone chose courage over comfort. She touched her silver locket, no longer hidden beneath a collar. For 9 years, I let this town convince me that my appearance was something to apologize for. I made myself small, invisible, ashamed. But scars don't make you broken. They make you a survivor. The audience was silent, hanging on her every word. Every single person in this room has scars, she continued. Some you can see, some you can't. Some came from accidents, some from illness, some from the battles we fight just to get through each day. But every scar has a story, and every story matters. Senator Ellis wiped at his eyes. Danny and David are here tonight, Emily said, gesturing to the two teenagers seated in the front row with their parents. They stood and waved, no longer the frightened 5-year-olds she had carried through fire and smoke. When I see them, Emily said, her voice cracking just slightly, I don't see my scars as ugly anymore. I see proof that love is stronger than fire, that courage is stronger than fear, that one person willing to act can change everything. Mrs. Martin took the microphone next. Emily taught all of us that we had been looking at the wrong thing. We saw scars and called them flaws. She showed us they were medals of honor. The ceremony ended with the entire crowd on its feet, applauding, embracing, connecting. Strangers bonded over shared strength. In that room, there was no shame, only admiration. Beauty, they understood now, comes in many forms. 6 months later, another call changed Emily's life. A National Foundation for Burn Survivors invited her to become their official spokesperson. A children's hospital asked her to visit young patients. A filmmaker proposed a documentary. But the moment that meant the most came on an ordinary Tuesday morning at the Silver Spoon. A little girl, no older than 6, walked in with her mother. A large birthmark covered half her face, the kind that usually draws stares. She spotted Emily behind the counter, her scars bathed in warm sunlight streaming through the diner windows. "You're pretty," the girl said simply. Emily knelt to the child's level. "So are you, sweetheart. So are you." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "She's been so self-conscious lately. Kids at school." "I know," Emily said gently. "But she's perfect exactly as she is, and someday she'll understand that her differences make her special, not strange." Emily stood tall, her face glowing in the morning light. She no longer hid her scars, no longer apologized for them. She had learned the most important truth of all. Real beauty is courage, and real courage always leaves marks worth showing. Subscribe to AZN Stories, where the stories behind the scars are finally told. Share the name of someone who changed your life with quiet bravery. Let's honor the hidden heroes all around us, and real courage always leaves marks worth showing. Subscribe to AZN Stories, where the stories behind the scars are finally told. Share the name of someone who changed your life with quiet bravery. Let's honor the hidden heroes all around us,